Hello and welcome to the Hacking Web Applications with WebSploit workshop. My name is Omar Santos. I hope that you're enjoying the conference and all the activities that we have here for you. Now, this is a hands-on workshop. We're going to be doing a few, tips and initial setup, tutorials, and then you're going to complete a fairly extensive hands-on lab. And there's a, lab guide here for you, and we're going to go into the details in a second. Now, we're going to be using this learning environment called WebSploit, and what that is basically Kali Linux, and then on top of Kali Linux, we install several intentional vulnerable containers, basically Docker containers, running multiple applications. Some of the applications are fairly well known in the industry, some that are contributed by the community, by the community of OWASP, the Open Web Application Security Project, and also several containers that actually have created. And there's one in particular for this conference. Now, I also have a GitHub repository that I use for my video courses, for my books, and many different learning environments and learning engagements that I participate on. That has at least 8,000 plus cybersecurity references, both in the offensive and defensive techniques. So it has sample code, tutorials, and many different resources. So please feel free to take advantage of that. That is cloned also in the environment, and we also have several other tips and tools and there that do not come with Kali Linux. Well, enough about this introduction. Let's get started. So the first thing that I want to cover is that this training assumes that you have familiarity with virtualization technologies. For example, VirtualBox, VMware, ESXi, in VMware, or things like Proxmox. As a matter of fact, I'm running this version of WebSploit, or this install of WebSploit in Proxmox. I'm actually connected through my browser. And as a matter of fact, if you actually see in this other screen here, I'm running several instances of WebSploit in this environment, right, along with many other VMs. And each of these are physical boxes. So if I right now have a cluster of 4 physical servers, and within those servers, I have containers and different VMs. The one that I'm using right now is this one right here, which is the one running in this screen. So as I mentioned to you before, in order for you to run WebSploit, you just download Kali Linux, right? You can actually go to websploit.org and you will get all the instructions from here. But you download Kali Linux, put it in a VM, in a hypervisor of your choice, whether it's VirtualBox, VMware Workstation, Fusion, ESXi, Proxmox, and the list goes on and on. And by the way, Offensive Security has created several .ova files that you can actually import in VirtualBox or VMware, and those are there for your convenience, right? Or of course, you can actually install it in a VM from the .iso files that are within kali.org, right? So this link in here, of course, will actually take you to kali.org and specifically the download page. And feel free to download the latest version. So a question that I get all the time is, will this run in environments like Parrot Security? And their answer is yes, it will actually absolutely run in Parrot Security. And at the end of the, if you think about it, Kali Linux and Parrot Security are based on Debian, right? What is actually running behind the scenes is a Debian distribution. So with that said, the install script, which is the second step for you in order to set up WebSploit, right? Basically, you just run this command, and this will download the install script from websploit.org, and they will actually execute it. And you have to be a root, so you have to install different, elements, and I install containers, and of course Docker, and so on. And so you need sudo access. That's the reason that you see sudo bashing here. And all these commands are tailored to run on top of Debian, right? And using apt install, all those commands, right? So yes, it will run in Parrot. Yes, it will run in Kali. It will not run in things like Arch Linux or CentOS or things like Black Arch, which is based on Arch Linux. So if you want to be a little bit more exploratory and you have Parrot security, I know that a lot of people nowadays actually use Parrot as well. Feel free to actually use this command as well, and it will work. But for you to follow along as close as possible to the lab guide, I strongly suggest for you to actually stick with Kali for this environment. Now, once you actually get this command going, let me actually demonstrate it real quick. I already have WebSploit here enabled or installed, but I will install it again. As a matter of fact, I'm going to remove the install script. So we'll start from scratch. You execute curl, and then the command is -s, so lowercase s, uppercase L, and then https websploit.org/install.sh and sudo bash, right? So this will download, and you see here is actually already running. Since I already have all this set up in my environment, I am not going to run the script, right? Plus, we're going to be here for a long time while the script runs. It will take you, depending on how much compute power you have, it may actually take you anywhere between 5 to 10 minutes to set up the whole environment, right? Also assuming that you have a really good internet connectivity. Some of these, of course, is downloading tons of different programs. What I did in WebSploit is that I install a few things that do not come with Kali Linux, right? That I use for other trainings that I deliver, whether it's in conferences like this or in environments like O'Reilly, right? So I teach a lot of ethical hacking courses in O'Reilly. We used to call that Safari, right? The O'Reilly Learning. But at any rate, another thing that I install here is things like Ghidra, which is a reverse engineering tool that the National Security Agency, or the NSA, created and they released a few years ago. It's very, very popular for reverse engineering. And as a matter of fact, if you actually go to the root directory here, which I am, you'll see, have several scripts or several files in here that do not come with your environment. It's just me, playing around. But there's basically this version of Ghidra at the time of recording, right, that I have in there, and you can actually, run it. And there's an exercise within your lab guide that I'm going to cover in a few seconds that, where you can actually use things like Ghidra or other debuggers or reverse engineering tools that are available to you, right? But for the most part, for the entirety of the course, probably you have only one exercise that you needed, or two, right? But it's in there, right? So feel free to take advantage of that. I also have tools like Radamsa and Spiderfoot and several other ones that do not come with Kali Linux. Another thing that I have is that I cloned a GitHub repository. By the way, if you're not familiar with this GitHub repository, I strongly suggest for you to become familiar. If you go to websploit.org, or my other site is called hacker with the number 4.org, you will see a link to this GitHub repository, right? You click on there, and it will take you here, right, to this GitHub repository. As you see, that is very popular. Tons and tons of people actually, keep track of them. So feel free to star, so you can, get all the different commits and all the different updates every time that I put something new into this repository. But as we stand right now, we have over 8,000, and that's 8,000 different cybersecurity references in many different topics, from things like adversarial emulation, buffer overflow, bug bounties, which is very popular nowadays, how to build your own lab, exploit development, cracking passwords, reverse engineering, things like around Metasploit, web penetration testing, which we're covering here today, and so on. And I basically put, the last time I updated it was yesterday, but I put new information here pretty much on a daily basis. So again, I strongly recommend for you to become familiar with this GitHub repository, and within the environment, WebSploit, or that install script, will download or clone. It's a better word, right? It will do a git clone to that repository. So if you go to hacker with the number 4 here, so if you change directories to there, the whole GitHub repository is within the environment. So you can actually do git fetch and git pull. And of course, we'll actually get the new information that, I continuously put in there. Like you see a whole bunch of different entries for new tools and different scripts that I have created and so on. So again, I typically update this GitHub repository almost on a daily basis. Right? All right. So assuming that you already downloaded Kali, you put it in the VM, and of course you can actually pause this video. That's the reason that we converted this to be more of a on demand, right? And knowing that it takes a little bit of time for you to set up the environment, but assuming that you already have done that and you have run the script, one thing to verify to see if everything is running is by just doing a Docker PS, right? And you see all the containers that actually are running here, right? The lab guide is gonna go over in detail what are those containers. Another a little bit better formatting for looking at the containers and what are the ports that are supposed to be running on is that I have a script called just containers.sh, right? So a very small, lame shell script that will also be downloaded and executed at the moment that you run the install script. But at any time you can actually execute it, as I'm showing here, and it has two sections. The first section is the vulnerable containers that are supposed to be in the system, right? So you see webgoat, ushop, dbwa, mutility, and I'm gonna go over these containers in a second, right? But then down below you also see this right here, right? And again, these are all the names of the containers and the ports that are associated with it and the status of each container, right? Now, this is a little bit better formatting of the Docker PS command. So basically, at the end of the day, this is the Docker PS command with a table format, and I'm only just showing the names, the ports, and the status, right, for your reference. So if for some reason you are troubleshooting that perhaps you cannot connect to DBWA or RTV safe mode or GrayHat MMX, then you can correlate the port and the information about the container and see if it's actually running down below in the list, right? So this is a quick way to at least verify if your environment has actually been set up correctly. So I mentioned the lab guides several times already, and hopefully you already are in this screen, right? So if you're participating in the GrayHat conference, you can go to websploit.org/GrayHat, and it will take you to the screen. Again, hopefully you're watching the video there. Now, there are two different ways that you can take an approach, or two different tracks for completing the exercises that are outlined in the lab guide. I'll get into that in a few seconds, right? But the lab guide, can be accessed through many links in here. I have the link here, pretty much everything that you see a link with the name lab guide, right? So if you click on it, it will actually take you to a PDF file that you can download, right? It's yours. And it's a very comprehensive PDF, and with set of instructions. And this case actually has 59 pages. And basically you have two options. If you are a beginner or intermediate level, you can go through all the exercises, right? And all these exercises, as you can actually see, they're pretty comprehensive, and they even have screenshots, annotations, step-by-step instructions of what to do or what not to do, right? I go over in detail about the containers, and as a matter of fact, I'll go over the containers in a few minutes, right? Now, the second option is that you can go straight to the last exercise, which is a capture the flag-like exercise. And that exercise, I'm not going to give you a lot of information, right? So basically, you're going to be applying everything that you learned in the previous 11 exercises, right? So for the ones for this conference, it's called GrayHat MMX. Now, if you already had installed WebSploit before GrayHat and before this conference, you can update the containers by actually just running the upgrade.sh script, just like I'm actually showing here, right? So you have, let me make this a little bit bigger. You can wget, right? So use wget to download the websploit.org update.sh script, so the script from websploit.org, and then just run it, right? That basically will remove the existing containers And then, we'll get the newer versions of the images, and it will instantiate the containers again for you, including the new one for this conference and for this exercise and workshop. And then after you do that, you will be able to browse to that container by going over your loopback address, right, or localhost on port 9001. So with that said, I'm going to go over a few things that you should pay attention to, even though we cover it here in detail in the lab guide. But I'm going to go over a few things that will be beneficial for you in case you're troubleshooting some problems, especially with things like a web proxy. All right, we're back to WebSploit, right? And I'm just gonna do the containers.sh script, and in there you see all the containers that are supposed to be running, right, up here, and all the containers that are running. Now, one of the things that I get all the time, and especially since you're gonna be using a proxy, basically throughout the course in here, is that I have a lot of questions on where people run into problems with either the web browser not configured correctly to send traffic to the web application, right? So basically, the idea of a proxy is that you have your web browser here, right? So this is all within WebSploit, of course. Right? I put WB for web browser, and then you're gonna have a proxy. In that case, can be something like Burp or Burp Suite, which is one of my favorite ones. Or the OWASP Z-Attack proxy, right? Or ZAP. That's a ZAP in there. And basically, those are two options for a proxy, even though those tools perform other things, like the OWASP Z-Attack proxy perform automated scanning. Burp Suite, it comes in two versions, the Community Edition, which is the one that you have access here for free. And there's a Professional Edition. One of the differences is that with the Professional Edition, you will be able to do automated scanning. With the Community Edition, you cannot. But whenever it comes to run it as a proxy, right? So here, my P for a proxy, both of them will actually work perfectly and, more than enough, right? So basically, the idea of a proxy, if I erase this down below, and I'm going to put here a web application. So too many W's, but this is your web browser, the proxy, and the web application. And basically the idea is for you to intercept any type of transaction, any type of HTTP, HTTP or HTTPS, but the protocol is HTTP, transactions between the web browser and the web application. And that allows you to intercept, modify, or discard any packets, any request, and also the responses coming back to you from the web application, right? Now, if you want to set up your browser, actually it's not if, you have to set up your browser to send traffic to the proxy. What you can do, and again, all this is documented in your lab guide, but I want to at least go over this because it's the number one question that I get all the time. You can go under the hamburger icon in here, menu. You go under Preferences and then scroll all the way down. And under Network Settings, you click on Settings in here, right? Then from there, make sure that you click Manual Proxy Configuration. And in this case, we're only going to be using HTTP for the transactions. We don't have HTTPS in those containers, right? But here we're going to point it to our loopback address, which is 127.0.0.1, on the default port, which is 8080, right? And yes, you can actually use this proxy for all the other protocols or not, right? And as a matter of fact, I'm going to leave it like that because I'm going to explain to you a few other things that you may run into or error messages that if you're trying to actually navigate to sites that are in HTTPS, you will see some error messages, and I'm going to explain how you can actually troubleshoot and what are the reasons that you get in these error messages, right? Now, another thing is that under no proxy for, make sure that you don't have anything in here, right? That even if it says 127.0.0.1 or localhost, you remove that because the containers are running in the same environment. So we're running everything in one VM. And one of the reasons that I created WebSploit or WebSploit Labs is basically convenience for you to not have anything to worry about, running at a second or third VM, and everything is actually contained within this environment, right? Now, once you click on OK, this is one of the messages that, tons and tons of my students, ping me all the time of, why I cannot connect to a site, right? So if I go to, hacker.org, again, you're going to see this, the proxy server is refusing connections. And why is that? Well, because I haven't launched any proxies in here, right? So I have to go and look for burp. There's two ways you can actually do it, just by typing burp in here, right? And you see that burp suite comes up. Or, let me make this big again. Or basically by navigating under web application analysis, and you see burp suite in here. The other proxy that I mentioned, or the other tool that also includes a proxy, is the ZAP, the OWASP ZAP application, so the Z-Attack proxy. But now I'm actually going to be using burp. And, it's starting, and this is a community edition. I'm actually not going to update it right now. You can just select the defaults. It will, start burp. And now, of course, you're even going to get this message, hey, should upgrade to the professional versions. No, we don't have to. I go back to my page in here, or to my browser. Now, if I try to go to hacker.org again, guess what? You're going to get a different error message this time. So if you see here, now it's saying the software is preventing Firefox, which is the default browser in Kali, from connecting to that site. And the reason for that is because we're actually going over HTTPS, right? If you were doing this in the real life, so in other words, if you were doing this and for a pen test or for bug bounties, right? And you're trying to intercept transactions between your web application, which is running in HTTPS, and of course your web browser and vice versa, you have to install the Portswigger CA certificate, right? So, and that's one of the reasons. And in the lab guide, I go over, I give you some pointers on how you can actually do that, right? Now, we are not, and I repeat again, we are not going to be using HTTPS for the containers. All of them actually are running in different ports over HTTP. So, another thing that you may run into, and please pay attention to this one too, right, is that if you actually go over, let's say, port or the IP address 127.0.0.1, and I'm just going to go to one of them, 8883, which is DVW8 in here, right? And in there, if you see that I'm able to go, right? If I go to Burp Suite and go under proxy, even though intercept is on, I'm not able to see any traffic or any packets from this application. So I was able to log in, and there's nothing in there. So one of the things that why this may actually not work or is not intercepting the transaction is because we're actually going to 127.0.0.1 and we're running everything within the same VM, right? So to circumvent this, yes, you can actually type localhost, and in some cases it actually will work. In some cases it didn't. Like for example, here it did not. You still don't have anything in burp. However, let's actually take a look at our IP addresses, right? And this is an alias, just the I for IP. Let me actually type the whole command. So it's IP-brief for brief in my case, just so you can show it a little bit better in the screen. C for color, again for just cosmetic, and then A to see all the adapters. You see many different network adapters in here, but those are for the Docker container, so you can ignore that. You can also ignore Docker 0. And the ones that we are interested on is this IP address, right? So of course yours will be different. In my case, my Kali VM is running on the IP address 192.168.88.88. So if I go back to my browser and I change localhost for that IP address, oops, if I spell it correctly and then put a T in there. Now you see that the proxy is able to intercept the transactions, right? And another thing that you can do is you can actually forward the transaction to the application. Now that we're logging in, you see that right now I'm actually collecting, because it's all going over HTTP, right? So you can see the password was password, the username was admin, the user token is this. One thing that is actually really cool about Burp is that it allows you to do a lot of interactions with other features that it comes with, like the intruder, the repeater, the sequencer, the decoder. Like, for example, if I wanted to potentially decode this, I can actually send to decoder, and then from there select, what I actually want to decode it as, right? And in the lab guide, again, we walk you through, step by step on each of the exercises. So I'm not gonna go into any of them in here, right? Another thing is that, of course, we only have just a few minutes in here, and your lab guide is probably going to take you a few hours, right? Especially if you're in the beginner phase. What I try to do is put as much as material as I can in the lab guide. However, we are not even scratching the surface. That VM, the WebSploit VM, with all the containers, has at least 400 plus exercises. I think right now it's about 455 or something. So between the capture the flag, containers that I actually create for, different conferences and things like that, between the other ones that are, intentional vulnerable applications that have existed for quite some time. So for example, if I go back and look at the containers, going down the list, WebGoat is it's an application that is a very, very awesome project by the OWASP organization, right? So I already mentioned to you OWASP, but I never actually said what it is, right? So the Open Web Application Security Project, if you go to the website.org, it's an organization that is international, and it has tons of local chapters, in other words, local groups within different geographical locations. So whether you're in the US, in Asia, or in Europe, they have tons and tons of different communities where you can participate and learn from each other. Now, just like their acronym says, the Open Web Application Security Project, the P for projects, they have different projects in their environment. WebGoat is one, JuShop is another project, Mutility Day was another project, BWAP was also created by folks in WASP, and so on. The ones that you have right now, like RTV Safe Mode, GrayHat, Mayhem, HackMe, and as a matter of fact, I don't see it there, but Yascon as well. All those are actually created by me, right? So they're not, basically I contributed to the community, and I'm going to continue to create others, right? So those are a little bit more advanced than the ones, on top, right? There are different utilities and plugins that you can configure in your web browser for turning on or turning off the proxy configuration. Remember that we went, to here and the preferences, etc., right? So in order for you to not having to do that all the time, you can install things like proxy or Foxy Proxy, right? That I'm running here. And I already have a profile, and you can have many of them, for Burp. So if I wanted to actually turn it on, I turn it on like that. If I want to turn it off, and then the web browser not sending any traffic to the proxy, then you can just toggle these buttons right in here and don't have to go through the whole process of actually going, down below to settings, etc., right? So that's, again, convenience. Since you're going to be doing a lot of these exercises here today, right? Probably, you may find it useful, and you may want to actually just download it. So now if I go back to websploit.org, right, it will be able to log in or to access the website. And a few things that I want to highlight in here, and they're also documented in the website. The first thing, of course, this VM will contain vulnerable software. So all the containers actually will have vulnerable software. And don't expose it to the internet. You're going to get, pawned, right? You're going to get hacked. And the other thing is that I did not and I repeat, I did not configure Docker to start at boot time. So if you have to reboot for some reason, or later, you shut down the VM and you coming back in, you have to run this command in order to run Docker again, right? So service Docker start. It's just a very, very basic command if you're already familiar with Linux. And I know that a lot of you are just getting started, so don't have any familiarity even with Linux environments. So at least a little bit of a prerequisite for this one is you have to have some familiarity with Linux. You have to have familiarity with what web applications are, and definitely have to have familiarity with virtualization technology, right? But that's pretty much it, right? If you're starting in cybersecurity, this class and this exercise is definitely for you, right? But anyways, you run the service Docker start, and then that will start all the containers automatically. And basically, you can just then have fun, right? To obtain all the status of the Docker containers, you can do the Docker PS, or as I demonstrated before, with the container script, it will show them like that, right? So feel free to first of all, keep in touch. There's a lot of ways to actually keep in touch with me. Oh, and by the way, one thing that I forgot. If you already have WebSploit, I know that some of you may already have participated in other training that I offer in many different places. If you have already WebSploit and you want to take advantage of today's capture the flag container, then you can basically just run the upgrade.sh script that I mentioned to you before. And here are the instructions again, right? Just do a wget, go to websploit.org/update.sh, and then run it. And I also even have a video here on how to update the intentional vulnerable containers in WebSploit. So with that said, thank you, have fun. And if you run into any problems, feel free to actually, follow up in Discord. You can follow up in the Discord for this conference, or directly to the Red Team Village Discord. And all that information is, of course, also in your, in this documentation here. So thank you, have fun, and stay in touch.